The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to enter into Gehenna." Words inspired by God. So the prophets of Israel are a strange group, really strange group. When you look at the whole history of prophecy throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, if we begin, Moses regarded as the first great prophet of Israel, and he flourished about 1250 BC. And then you have today's character, you have Elijah, who flourished about 800 BC. And then his designated heir was Elisha. And then you have Isaiah around 740 BC. And then a great prophet, Jeremiah, about 600 BC. So there's a very definite movement, of the spirituality going through it. But some of these are really, really, really tough characters. So I'm going to give you the backstory today, to the reading that Mary did for us. So the backstory basically is this, that when the Israelites came out of Egypt about the year 1250 BC, and they wander in the desert for 40 years, and then they come into the promised land about the year 1210. The problem is the land is occupied. So it takes them 200 years to conquer the land. So they don't capture Jerusalem until the year 1010 BC under David. So they spend 200 years trying to conquer the land. So there's various prophets at this stage, Moses and then Nathan and then Elijah. And so after 200 years in the land, they begin to figure out that this God, they're not monotheists by any stretch of the imagination. Moses is not a monotheist by any stretch of the imagination. So they begin to figure, after 200 years in the land, conquering the land, and regular droughts and famines, that this God Yahweh that they've been following is really good at making war, but very, very poor at making rain. So they figured out maybe they should be, changing their allegiance to an agricultural divinity who would be able to give them, good harvest. So at this stage, the king of Israel, in the time of, we're talking about Elijah. Elijah flourishes about the year 800 BC. And Elijah, the name Elijah is actually a nickname that he gave to himself. In Hebrew, it is Eliyahu. And Eliyahu literally translates as Yahweh is my God. So again, Elijah is not a monotheist. Monotheism will not enter Judaism until after the Babylonian exile, about the year when they come back from the land of from Persia and Babylon about 529 BC, having been under the influence of Zoroastrianism, which had reduced all of the divinities down to two: a god of light called Ahura Mazda and a god of darkness called Ahriman. And so the Zoroastrians were the first to shrink the pantheon of divinities down to two. And then Israel took it a step further and brought them down to one. But that wouldn't happen until about the year 520 BC. So Elijah is not a monotheist. But like Moses, he's into what's called monolatry. And monolatry is the worship of a particular divinity. It's not that you believe there is only one God, but your covenant is with this particular guy, and you'll only worship this particular guy. It's called monolatry. And so they were worshipping Yahweh, the God Yahweh, but they believed there were lots of other gods as well. But at this stage, the people of Israel are shifting their allegiance, because this Yahweh guy is very, very poor at agriculture. There's regular famine in the land. Meanwhile, the king of Israel, a guy called Ahab, has married a Philistine princess called Jezebel, from which is the famous word Jezebel, tough lady. And she follows the god Baal, and she's brought her own god and her own prophets into the land of Israel as well. So there's worship of two different divinities going on, Yahweh and Baal. And Elijah then, whatever his name was, gave himself the nickname Eliyahu. My God is Yahweh. You guys can worship Baal, but I'm worshipping Yahweh. So he calls himself Eliyahu. My God is Yahweh. But at one stage, he's really, really upset that most of the people are going over to the worship of the god Baal. So he sets up a contest offering on top of Mount Carmel, in which he challenges the priests of Baal or the prophets of Baal to call on their God to set fire to the sacrifice. So the agreement is each of them will slaughter a bull. Elijah will slaughter a bull and put it on one altar, and the prophets of Baal will kill a bull and put it on another altar, and then each of them will call on their God. And the God who answers with fire and sets fire to the Holocaust, that's the guy that they should follow. And so the prophets of Baal, they slaughter their bull, put it on the altar, and they're dancing around the altar, and they're singing and dancing and pleading with their God to set fire, and nothing happens. And they start piercing themselves with arrows to draw their own blood to see if they can persuade this God to come down and set fire to the Holocaust, and nothing happens. So Elijah says, I say, you got your chance, step aside. And he looks up into the heavens and says, I know that you're the guy, and you know that you're the guy, go for it. And all of a sudden, lightning bolt burns the bull. And so everybody is amazed. And Elijah says, go grab him. And the crowd set on the 450 prophets of Baal, and they dragged them down to the brook Jabbok, and they cut their throats. They killed 450 prophets of Baal. Jezebel hears about this, and she's not a happy camper. And she says, may my God do such and such to me if by this time tomorrow I don't have your head. So Elijah scoots, disappears. And he goes to Mount Horeb. So Horeb has two names, Sinai or Horeb. This was the mountain on which Moses got the commandments from God, 450 years before. And he wants to encounter Yahweh. And he's waiting for Yahweh to show up. And there's this huge wind that rocks the entire mountain. And Elijah says, here's Yahweh, that's my kind of God, coming with a lot of noise. But we're told, but God wasn't in the wind. And then there's an earthquake that shakes the whole mountain. And Elijah says, this is my guy. We were told, but God wasn't in the earthquake. And then there was a fire that consumed all the vegetation on the mountain. And Elijah said, yeah, fire, I understand, this is the God. But God was not in the fire. And then it's interesting, today's translation is very different from the normal one. The normal one says, there was the sound of a tiny whispering voice. This is the Canadian translation today, and it says, there was the sound of silence. But the message is, it's a totally toned down message. And then finally Elijah gets it, this is Yahweh. He's not in the great wind, the tornado. He's not in the earthquake. He's not in the fire that consumes the mountain. He's in the small, still voice. But what's Elijah's reaction? He goes out and he's like a little 5-year-old kid complaining. They're all against me and I didn't do nothing. He says, they've turned against you and they've killed all your prophets. I alone am left and they're trying to kill me as well. Do you ever hear a story go through 180 degrees? This guy has just killed 450 people. 450 prophets. He's complaining out to Yahweh, I'm the good guy, they're the bad guys, they're killing all your prophets, and they're trying to kill me, and I didn't do nothing. So it's like a kid in the schoolyard, a 5-year-old going home and telling Mommy they're all against me, and it's not my fault. And so you think at this stage he's getting the message that God is not in the tornado, and God is not in the earthquake, and God is not in the fire, God is in the silence. It didn't last very long. So Elijah doesn't last very long either. Within a few weeks of this, he's taken up into heaven in a fiery chariot. And the story behind it is this. He's told by God in today's story to designate Elisha as his prophet after him. So he drags Elisha and they're walking together and he's telling Elisha that he has to leave. And Elisha is very upset. And they come to the river and they cross the river. Elijah takes off his cloak and rolls it up and he strikes the river with his cloak. And the river opens up and they pass through. And Elisha is really impressed at this. And all of a sudden, this fiery chariot comes down from heaven and it grabs Elijah and takes him off and his cloak falls on the road. And there's Elisha looking at the fiery chariot, kind of obviously an extraterrestrial vehicle, taking Elijah off, and the cloak is on the ground. And before he went, he said, I want 3 times your spirit. Give me 3 times your power. So he says, I'll test it. He picks up the cloak, goes back to the river is flowing again, he rolls up the cloak and he strikes the river and the river parts and he walks through. So now he figures, I'm the man, I'm the main man at this stage. And what's his very first action? He comes into a little village and the boys of the village come out and they start mocking him because he was bald. And look at him, Baldy, Baldy, Baldy. And his first act as the prophet of Israel, what does he do? He calls a she-bear out of the forest and the she-bear kills 42 of the kids. No, this is his first act as prophet. These are not nice people. So he obviously didn't get the message that the God is not the God of silence. The God is the God of anger and retribution. So again, he's not a monotheist at this stage, but he's dedicated to this God Yahweh. So some things never change. In the name of religion, we've continued to persecute and to kill all throughout human history. But the modern kind of religion is the science of politics and the science of the national security state. That has become our new God. It is our new idol. So it was really, really upsetting to me years ago when Madeleine Albright, what was her position? She's Secretary of State. Under which president? Remember? Under Clinton. She was interviewed famously on 60 Minutes at one stage. And this was at the end of, there'd been sanctions against Iraq in place for several years, and as a result of which 750,000 Iraqi kids had died because they didn't have access to medical resources because we put an embargo on medical resources getting to the country. And Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, has been interviewed on 60 Minutes by another woman, and the woman asked her, do you think this is an acceptable price to pay for American politics? That 750,000 Iraqi kids have died. And her answer was, yes, we think this is an acceptable price to pay to protect American interests in the Middle East. This is how many years ago? 20 years ago, in our own times. And so these false gods in whose names we kill and justify killing are still alive and well. The very recent articulation would be fundamentalist Islam and ISIS that thinks it's okay, to literally behead people and crucify people. So the viciousness perpetrated in the name of a god, whether the god is the national security state or it's some divinity in the sky, we continue to do it. That's the story.
Yeah.
That's the story. Yeah.
So he was rewarded.
Yeah, that's the story, that he was rewarded. Of course, that's not who God is at all. So last Sunday I was talking about the God in whom I do not believe and the God that I do believe in, and they're very, very different. We have made gods in our own image and likeness. All we've done is we've taken human characteristics, amplified them to the power of n, and then attributed them to some divinity in the sky, both our bad points and our good points. We've created gods in our image and likeness. And the gods that have been handed down to us by religion for the main part are made up, amplifications of humans, powerful humans. Yeah, they have nothing got to do with the God that is. And this will be the great insight of Jesus. And beginning even with so you get the first vestiges of it in today's story with Elijah, that God is not in the wind or the tornado, he's not in the earthquake, he's not in the fire, it's in the stillness. But to be still, you have to quiet your heart. And you can't have a quiet heart if there's anger or revenge in it. That's the first inkling of it, in the Hebrew scriptures. And then beautifully articulated by the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah will come 200 years after Elijah. And in some senses, if you were to pick out any one character from the Hebrew scriptures that most resembles Jesus, it would be Jeremiah. Really a man of peace. So the idea is bubbling to the surface but is quashed again and again and again. And this is the history of mysticism. Throughout human history, you get these bubbling, evidence of the mystical within the human spirit, because all religious impulses come from a mystical origin. But they get sidetracked and hijacked by egoic, either the ego of the individual leader or the ego of the oligarchy, and then they're put into very nefarious purposes. But again and again and again in human history, you get people like the St. Francis or the Mother Teresa or the Mahatma Gandhi who are talking about real spirituality and real peace. Martin Luther King, these kinds of people. But mostly they wind up dead. We assassinate them because they're a threat to conventional wisdom. That's the message that Jesus is giving in the gospel today. And the gospel for the last 3 or 4 days is pointing to the same reality, that Jesus is really trying to internalize the values that had been previously inscribed, on commandments, and making the point that, it's not external precept that brings you into the kingdom, it's the internalization of the values involved. So he's going to go through a whole list of stuff like sexual sins and, swearing falsely, anger against your brother or sister, whatever. So he's going to take a whole bunch of precepts from the 613, commandments of Torah, and he's going to internalize them. That is what happens in the heart is important. So in a sense, every human being will respond to any situation in one of 3 ways. We'll respond by a thought that arises as a result of what's happened, or a word we'll speak, or a behavior we will engage in. So we have 3 basic responses to any life situation. We'll think something, we'll say something, or we'll do something. And Christ is saying, it begins with the thought. And the thought is the story we make up about the experience we're having. Am I going to make up a story of anger or a story of compassion about what's just happened? Because that's going to result in words, and the words very frequently will lead to actions and behaviors. So he's trying to internalize it and ask the question, how are you thinking about life? How are you thinking about the experiences you're having? What kinds of stories are you making up about it? Because I've said to you this many, many times, that there's a huge difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the price of incarnation. Pain is the realization we're born into physical bodies that age, get sick and die. We live in a world of tsunamis and earthquakes and tornadoes. That's the reality, that's pain. But that's very different from suffering. Suffering is the result of the stories we make up about the pain we're experiencing. And I believe that 95% of human discomfort is suffering, it's not pain. It's not actually what's happening to us, it's the stories we're making up about the experiences we're having. That's where the suffering comes in, and it's the stories that make up the suffering. So this is what Christ is saying. You have to internalize the laws given by Moses or by any of the great prophets that have been written in stone and promulgated. They're just the externalization. But if you haven't internalized them, if you haven't stopped making up stories about anger, and justifying revenge of all kinds, if your stories are not stories of compassion and forgiveness, then you're going to see a world filled with war. So that's actually one of the vows that Gandhi took.
Pardon?
That was one of the vows that Gandhi took. Yeah, to not say anything that wasn't true, and to not say something that was true. Not to keep his mouth shut about stuff that needed to be said. So it was a two-sided vow. Never to speak an untruth, but never not to speak a truth which needed to be said, but which was difficult. Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. So sins of omission in the old Catholic catechism was called, there was sins of commission and sins of omission.